Welcome back, everybody, to the Disc and Dice podcast, episode number 28. I'm joined, as always, by my co-hosts Timmy and Paul, and we are back from the holiday period, promising that we weren't going to be here for a little while. We're back a little bit later than what we would have liked to be, but I guess I'll start off by asking you guys how you guys are doing, and how was your holiday period? What did you get up to?
Well, look, I'll start us off with a confession. I haven't told either of you guys this yet, but you know how in our last episode we told everybody, look, we're gonna take a bit of a break over the Christmas break, so it'll be a little bit longer and rah 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 rah. I forgot to share on our social medias that episode came out, and I looked and we've got so fewer listens on that episode than any of the other ones. So a lot of people are just going to think that we've vanished from the face of the earth without saying anything. So that's on me. Welcome back, everybody who's come back. Sorry about the absence. It was a planned break.
You know, I feel like we all just kind of did that episode and switched off because I haven't checked the SoundCloud plays on that episode at all since we did it. And now you mentioned this, I'm looking again, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's about half what it normally is.
Whoops.
So yeah, we're all really switched on about it then.
So I guess that answers JT's question about how our holiday breaks went. They went really nicely. We all relaxed a whole bunch.
Yeah, I don't know how much gaming you guys did. I did quite a lot. A lot of those kind of games that we don't really talk about on the pod, stuff like FIFA and things like that, where I'm just grinding away playing 30 hours a day of FIFA and things like that. I had a good time just doing that for ages.
I didn't actually do that much gaming over the actual holiday period itself, but since the last episode, I have done a whole lot. It's just that for whatever reason, I squeezed most of my gaming in once I went back to work. I got really into my Switch and was playing on the bus heaps, public transport on the way to and from work. And then, I don't know, for some reason, when I had all that free time on my holidays, I filled it with other things. And then I've been cramming the gaming in again.
I find that kind of happens, if you're not busy, you don't get anything done, even just fun hobby stuff. But if you're busy with work and busy with heaps of things, I feel like I'm so much more aware of the limited free time I have. So I'm really mindful about making the most of it, and I end up doing more unimportant stuff when I'm busy with important things.
Yeah, I guess it's like how when you have something on the next day that you don't have to go to work or whatever, you tend to stay up a little bit later because you're like, oh no, I want my time to myself, and it's once I go to sleep, it's work the next day. And when you have free time, and so you could sleep in if you wanted to and stay up later, you're like, I got nothing on tomorrow, so I'm just going to go get myself an early night now, get a jump on the day. At least that's how I think about it. I stay up way too late when I have something on the next day because I don't know. I feel like I'm not getting my own time.
I've never thought of it that way. I've never thought of when you go to sleep, work begins.
Yeah,
but
it's not a good.
That's really now. That's going to be the rest of my life now that I'll be aware of that.
I'm sorry, I've ruined you. I need to become one of those people that's yeah, sure. I make sure I'm getting up 2 hours before I have to leave the house so that I actually have something I'm doing myself to get myself out of that brain space. But I'm not a morning person, so it's not happening. That's wishful thinking.
Timmy's a major advocate for the one-day work week, which, some countries might be trialing soon.
Oh,
Timmy's country.
I feel like...
And I'll get through even less gaming then if they take away one of my work days.
I was going to say, based on your gaming work over the break, yeah, the podcast would be over if they put us back to a one-day work week.
What about you, JT? How was your break?
It was pretty relaxing. Did quite a bit of drinking over the break, and had some seriously memorable old man hangovers, as they're coined now. But no, it was pretty good. The New Year's was especially good. We went to Paul's brother's house and played some IRL games, notably cricket, and that was the one day for the whole year cricket day which hopefully is going to be a thing now. Always fun, but that's my physical exercise for the next 365 days. So
There's something that is like so much fun about backyard cricket. Like I think of back on it so fondly of like literally any time I play it, I've had the best time. But then at the same time, it's so restrictive. Like no one has a big enough backyard for proper backyard cricket, and you're constantly not really doing what you want to do for fear of losing the ball forever. Like I don't know,
which we did.
We lost so many balls.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, is it that limitation that makes it more fun? But I guess not, because you guys were just going for it.
Yeah, it's the more you drink as well, the harder it is to not smash it over the backyard, the back fence. I think we even got a couple thrown back, and then within like the hour they were gone. So
especially like when it's getting a little bit darker and everyone knows the game's just about over, we're gonna stop, or like food's nearly ready, and whoever's in bat is just like, we don't need this ball anymore.
It's all or nothing. Sixes from here on out.
Yeah.
And even when you make the rules that, if you hit it over the fence, you're out or something like that, it just doesn't help.
No, because like people aren't really doing it intentionally.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not like you put 6 and out, like no one wants to lose the ball anyway, right? So like, not like it wasn't a deterrent hitting it over the fence before you made that they have to go out, because they have to stop playing anyway if you lose the ball. But,
yeah.
And just before anyone gets worried, we haven't become a cricket podcast. That was just a yes. Yet we'll see after next year's cricket.
Specifically backyard cricket. Like we're not talking about any professional sports on this, but we're gonna survey backyards.
We could just be like a seasonal sports podcast, and we just go with whatever people are playing now. So we're just finishing off the cricket, and then we're going to go straight into the tennis for the rest of this episode.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's literally we're recording this on Super Bowl Monday, so who would like to discuss NFL with me, boys?
Do you guys hear those crickets?
This is where JT needs to put in a sound effect of just like tumbleweeds. But anyway, yeah, that's probably enough of like the real life stuff. That's not what anybody's listening for. What have we all been playing?
Well, I have been playing a game that it's a bit of a throwback, although it's actually a newly-ish released game. So I've been playing some Warhammer, and I've been playing a new skirmish game that they released called Warcry.
As in real life tabletop miniatures Warhammer?
Real life tabletop miniatures Warhammer, which I have been really wanting to get back into, I should say, for quite a while now. I think on a previous episode months ago, I mentioned that I really wanted to find my way back into some Warhammer once I was back in Australia. And one of the reasons for that is that Games Workshop have, over the last, I don't know how long, maybe like 5 or 10 years, they've really doubled down on small scale Warhammer, because I played it, I don't know how many years ago, like 15 years ago when I was a kid, and the kind of like ceiling or the bar for entry to Warhammer as a hobby was so high that I feel like you couldn't seriously get into playing Warhammer for under $1,000 when you're talking about like building an army and painting it and everything like that. Like that was genuinely the entry point to play seriously. Like you could buy like the starter box set, but you weren't really playing with that.
See, I like, looking at it, you can tell it's like not going to be an inexpensive hobby. So I assumed there would be, a hefty price element to getting started properly. But I wouldn't have dreamed you were looking at that much. Holy cow!
Yeah, like maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but I feel like once you buy that box set, to have like I'm trying to remember what it was back in the day, to have an army that's kind of like technically legal to play on the tabletop with like the full armies, you're looking at like hundreds of dollars worth of stuff to get into that. But yeah, like I sort of got out of that. I think JT was playing Warhammer as well back in the day. We were sort of part of the same group doing that. And yeah, like I said, there's been a real push towards these skirmish games, as they call them, which is basically, it's Warhammer where rather than using like tens of miniatures, like of all in their squads and tanks and vehicles and stuff like that, you just use like one squad basically of miniatures, and it's usually maybe maximum 10 versus 10, and it's supposed to be lower buy-in, so it's easier to get into the hobby, quicker games, simplified rules, all that kind of stuff. And I'm a big fan of just like the lore and the setting of Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k, the sci-fi setting. So this stuff really appealed to me, to kind of be able to get back into that world, but not have to have a second job to pay for it. And so the one that I have been playing is called, like I said, it's called Warcry, which is, it's a game that is in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, and it's based around all the Chaos factions, who are kind of like the bad guys, although no one's really a good guy in Warhammer. And basically each player is playing as a warband, and everyone plays as, or at least we play as Chaos warbands who are kind of battling against each other to be able to kind of rise up the Chaos ranks to sort of join the big Chaos armies that are attacking the good guys, so to speak. To sort of briefly explain how the game works, although I don't want to get like bogged down here in kind of rules talk, it's way more streamlined. So anyone who played Warhammer back in the day, and so JT, maybe you can relate to this. Timmy, I'm not sure whether you played any Warhammer, but when I last played, the rules for Warhammer were so like sluggish to play. There were so many different phases of play in every turn, and so you'd have like a deployment phase and a movement phase and a shooting phase and a melee phase and then like a recovery phase, and everything, you just worked so slowly through each phase. And if you're playing big armies against each other, you could regularly be just kind of sitting there for like half an hour while your opponent does all the things they can do on their turn. And I guess this is like, this is an example of just a game that has been slowly fine-tuned to be better over time. But Warcry has really tried to kind of counter some of those problems. Specifically the idea of kind of like too many phases in the game, and waiting heaps long for your opponent to do your turn. So, that kind of thing of sitting doing nothing while you wait for the other person to play.
In terms of the scale, so you mentioned that it's, I guess, slightly smaller in scale compared to the 40k that a lot of other people have come to know. Is it similar to maybe something like the other two games, Gorkamorka and Necromunda, which I think are also, they're in the 40k universe, I believe, but they're based around more smaller skirmishes as well, I think. Are they sort of, is it similar to that?
It's exactly like that.
Okay.
Ooh, okay. Then I have a question I want to jump in with real quickly, because the two things that JT just mentioned, aren't they both the kind of campaigns that had like growth and serious consequences for your pieces or your characters? I don't know what you call them in Warhammer, but like you'd have troops that would level up and gain experience and stuff, and then permanent injury and permanent death as well.
Yeah, Gorkamorka, I believe, had a persistent setting, or the option to at least have persistence.
Definitely did.
Yeah.
I didn't know too much about Necromunda. I just knew that it was a smaller scale setting, but yeah.
Yeah, Necromunda was kind of that was like the big one out of those, at least for like 40k. Necromunda was the big one. I played a lot of Gorkamorka back in the day, but it got discontinued pretty quick. I don't think it was a very successful game sales wise. But yeah, this has those kind of, I guess you'd say, like campaign elements to it. And I've just played sort of individual games of it, so not a campaign, although the guy I'm playing with, we're kind of talking about doing something like that, because the campaign play is really interesting in this, because you have kind of your own campaign narrative that you play through with your warband, and it doesn't matter who you play against. So you don't have to kind of play with the same people all the time to be able to work through the story of the campaign. You just play against anyone, and it kind of works with this idea that your Chaos Warband is just always trying to rise up the ranks to join the big boy Chaos army, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm pretty interested to try that stuff out, but for what I'm talking about now, we haven't actually had a chance to give that a go. What I was saying before about kind of the rules, just briefly about it, the two things it does which are really interesting are when you in terms of the phases of the play, rather than having like 10 different phases, which is an exaggeration, like old Warhammer used to have, this game just has 3 phases, but they're really, really quick. So you have the initiative phase where you see who goes first. Then you have the action phase, and then there's a final phase which you very even rarely use. So basically the game works like each turn you roll initiative to see who goes first, and then rather than having like movement, shooting, melee, all that kind of stuff like old Warhammer used to have, you have a list of actions you can do, and every action phase you just do 2. So this feels to me like it's a really board game type of mechanic. It's rather than the kind of strict miniatures thing where everyone moves, everyone shoots, that sort of thing. You just kind of have like, you have 2 action points and you do whatever you want. You want to move twice because you really want to like run and get to a certain objective, you can do that. If you just want to sit and shoot because you're in a good spot, well, you can shoot twice and stuff like that. And it's really cool because the game feels less kind of, well, you feel as a player less kind of locked into the phases of the game. And it means that you have more interesting choices, which, as far as I'm concerned, is like the basis of good games.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Like I like that you have the choice of what you want to do. Like you're not, a lot of games would be like you must move at least one space or whatever kind of thing,
Right.
or you must take the actions in this order, sort of thing. What I was going to ask though is we've spoken on this podcast about the Star Wars miniatures game. Is it X-Wing that we played?
Yeah, X-Wing.
And that's about the only like tabletop miniatures game that I've played, or at least comparable to Warhammer. And you mentioned like the kind of the 3 phases: initiative, action, and then I guess it's the results of that or consequences. You kind of said it varies, that third one. Is it similar at all in kind of how it plays? I know that like in X-Wing it's like kind of like initiative, movement, and then attack, so it's not strictly the same, but does it unfold in a sort of similar way?
That's a good question. Like, I guess to some extent every miniatures game kind of plays that same way, but beyond that I would actually say no, that it doesn't, because actually, you know what, I'm just kind of on the spot remembering the rules of X-Wing, and yeah, it kind of does. Because the other mechanic that I wanted to mention is the way turn order works. And I think, if I remember correctly, in X-Wing, your ships had like initiative, or kind of like an initiative rating, right? And it was sort of, you worked from highest to lowest or something like that. That was the order that you took. So if you had like a bunch of ships that were really high, you all moved first. Or if you had one that was high and one that was low, they might move at like alternate ends of the turn order. Well, the way it works in Warcry is when you do initiative, I don't want to get into like all the nitty gritty stuff here, but basically you do initiative and it decides who goes first and who has more points for special abilities. And you do that at the start of every single turn. And so, yeah, one person goes first, one person has slightly more points to do special abilities. That's kind of the trade-off. And it has a lot of really cool mechanics where you can be first, but you can choose to trade that in for more special abilities, or vice versa. You can, you can give up one of your special abilities to get the jump and move first.
So that could potentially really turn the tide of a game, I suppose. If your warband, is that what they're called?
Yep.
If your warband is really built on like you're like a quick team and you benefit from getting the first turn for whatever your abilities are, and you keep getting this other thing, like the special abilities and not getting to go first, that could have a massive impact on your gameplay. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it kind of can. Like I said, you're able to influence that a little bit. Like there's just ways in the game that you can kind of have an effect on that. Either, like I said, either not going first or having more abilities. But the other part of this mechanic, which makes it really interesting, is you move. This is the bit that's like X-Wing kind of. Whoever goes first, they move one member of their warband, then the other person moves one member, and you alternate like that until there's no more miniatures left to move. So rather than how traditional Warhammer used to work, was one person moves their entire army first, and then after all of those miniatures have moved and done all their stuff, the other person moves their entire army. And because
Oh
this
my
goes
gosh.
one at a time, you know, first up, it's just more engaging because you're not waiting ages for the other person to do stuff. You're just like, I move one dude, you move one dude, and you go back and forth like that. But it also makes it tactically really interesting because you don't get to see where their entire warband ends up before you make decisions. You know, they might move like one person forward to kind of like cover a doorway.
Draw you out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we had some really interesting situations where like just from my perspective, I had a character who had like a spear. It was kind of like a harpoon, and he was like that was quite a powerful weapon. But in my turns, I would hold him back until the end because I kind of would like I would wait and see where his warband ended up because I didn't want this guy to be exposed because he had this like ranged weapon, but he was actually quite weak. And if I made a move with him early, I'd kind of shown my hand, and it meant that the opponent could kind of gang up on that guy. And I think it also almost suits the kind of setting and the fiction a bit more. You know, like one of the things I love about Warhammer, like I said, is the lore, but I also love I love the miniatures and I love like the terrain and kind of like really buying into that whole story. And the guy I was playing with, it's friend of the show Butters, who's been on the pod a few times. He's like he painted up all of the war bands and he painted up the terrain. He had like the map there ready to go, so it was all like really immersive and cool. But moving these miniatures like this, I reckon, the sort of one miniature each turn order, it feels more like two warbands running towards each other rather than one moving and then the other, if you know what I mean. It doesn't feel so much like a turn-based game. It feels a lot more kind of messy and chaotic, which sort of really suits what they're going for.
Yeah, that appeals to me a whole lot. Like that gets me excited to like try this out.
Mm-hmm.
And also what you're saying about like the lower barrier to entry for this now as well, because that was always, one thing looking at it. And I've got, how some people say they've got like addictive personality, so they try to steer clear of, like booze or gambling or whatever. I've got
Mm-hmm.
a collective personality. Like I just, if it's cards or figurines or something, once I have one of something, I'm a collector. I like to see them lined up on my shelf. So I've steered clear of Warhammer. One question I did have though is how many miniatures make up your warband?
So for the game we played, I had 9, I think, and he had 7. And they all have sort of different points values. So I had like a trio of little guys who were like very fast but very weak, and then he had one mini that was really really strong. So they're kind of balanced. You have like I think it's 100 points or 1,000 points that you use to make your warband. And the game when you buy it comes with 2 warbands to play with, but then they've released a whole bunch of others that are just a warband on their own. So it's really cool. Like you obviously you've got to have like the box game itself to play to begin with, which costs I think about $200. So it's not crazy cheap, but I guess the idea of it is that you split it with another person because it's not much good on your own. And then I think the extra warbands to play are they're maybe between like $60 and $80, and yeah, there's a lot of other factions you can get. So I think it's kind of cool. It's like knowing that he has the kind of core set and I can play, it makes me really interested to just sort of pick up one extra warband because it's like, oh, we can kind of add this to that set and sort of be able to play around with that. The only other thing I wanted to mention about this was that the other thing it's kind of board gaming as well, a bit like the things I talked about before. When you set up the game, you have 4 decks of cards and you draw a card from each deck, and what they determine is where your warband deploys, what the objective of the game is, how the terrain is set up, and then there's a card that's called Twist, which just adds a mechanic to your game. So, for example, when we played our game, the twist was that the battle was taking place at night, and so every turn, the length or the distance that ranged weapons could shoot was reduced by 2 inches to kind of simulate it getting darker, which was a really cool thing because it meant that early on, my range guys, I knew I had to make the most of these because later in the game, they're useless because they're not going to be able to see anyone. And this feels to me really, really like something like Dead of Winter, where you kind of draw your cards to determine what game you're playing, that you do this as well. And so it adds that replayability just to an individual game. So it's not like if you wanted to play it long term, you don't have to play a campaign to get the most out of it. You can just play these one-off games, and it always throws interesting combinations at you.
And it sounds kind of like you don't have to just pick one way or the other, right? You could be doing a campaign,
Oh
and
yeah,
then you could go like, oh, let's just have a one-off skirmish, or playing with a friend who has no interest in any of that, and you can be like, let's just like reset everything. Like you'd know what your things are, I assume. You've got that written down or saved somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah. Cool.
it's very flexible like that. Like it's obviously with anything like Warhammer, or with Warhammer specifically, there's the kind of the arts and crafts side to it, with the sort of building and painting the minis. So that's kind of a barrier to entry for some people. But yeah, I'd be pretty keen to at some point get you guys interested as well in giving this a shot, even if we just play with like the war bands that Butters has.
Well, I'm interested, and so like if you keep with it, I hope you'll report back. I definitely want to hear like either way, even if you just play a couple more games and get more familiar with it. Hearing about more of this, my wallet's already kind of burning in my pocket, I think.
I knew I could rely on
Burn
you.
it will.
Yeah, look, you really twisted my arm on this one, Paul. But how about you, JT? What have you been into lately?
I have been continuing with Destiny 2. However, I've been getting into the base campaigns because I'm still just a free to play player. And I noticed that you can actually go back and play the first 2 or 3 expansions before the latest one, which was Shadowkeep, I believe.
So sorry, are you saying that like in the free to play that you're able to play Forsaken?
Um, Good
Or do you just
question.
mean like the first two,
No,
like Curse of
it's
Osiris and Warmind?
yeah, Curse of Osiris, Warmind, and the first one, which is I guess came with the base game where you've I think it's called the Red
Oh, that
something,
the Red War is
the
essentially
Red War.
the base, the main story for
Yes,
the
yeah,
base.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, you don't get Forsaken, but you do get Warmind, which I haven't played yet, but I have played Curse of Osiris and the
Warmind.
Red War.
Oh, okay, sorry, you just said that's one you haven't played.
Yeah,
Hey, look, before you get into thoughts and feelings and stuff, I just want to say I'm really excited that like the game's caught your attention and you've kept with it. Because I
yeah,
think it just keeps going from strength to strength, and yeah, especially now that it's got cross save as well. Like, there's the potential for us one day being able to play together if one of us happens to have it
that would
on
be really
the other
cool.
one. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd love to see that in the future. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I've mentioned to you not too long ago that I'm just surprised that it's free to play because at no point in the game I've really felt like I've had to spend any money on it. You get everything from the game except obviously some of the newer content. Um, but even still without the season pass which they've brought in, um, there's no real reason to pay for the game unless you want that.
Yeah,
You're getting an urge to play that extra content, but
yeah,
there's just that much of it in there that I'm yeah, I think it'll be a while before I do. So
yeah. If you want the extra story content, there's absolutely cause for spending a bit of money. But you're right, the game has so much going all the time with like being able to do Crucible and do raids and all sorts of things that the free to play element that you've got access to is expansive. You've got so much there to do. I think like I know they don't want to like hit people over the head with it, but Bungie really could have afforded to make a much bigger song and dance about how much content people have for free at the moment,
yeah,
because
and
they kind of went hard at it, but because it was so closely tied to Shadowkeep coming out as well, they were kind of trying to hedge their bets on both marketing strategies, and I think it kind of got lost in the gaming news cycle a little bit.
yeah, I think it's especially since people just see free to play and they just assume that it's going to be like most other free to play models, which is
3 hours and then
um,
pay to unlock. Yeah.
yeah, and pretty lucrative for the company who have put those measures in place, but it really doesn't feel like that at all. And I'm just surprised. Was especially impressed by just how good the PvP is in Crucible, and also Gambit. Gambit's, I guess, similar.
Yeah, see, I
The
really like
PvP is
Gambit,
amazing.
but
So
I have
cool.
not played a lot of Crucible, so I'll have to take your word for it. I'm
Yeah, I
not
mean,
very good at PvP, so I kind of steer clear.
it,
Gambit is more team based, so I enjoy that.
yeah, in no way does the PvP elements feel tacked on. They could basically just be their own game on their own. It's pretty impressive. So
Yeah,
kudos to Bungie.
Gambit is newish, but Crucible's been there since Destiny 1, since that one hasn't changed a lot. Like it gets maps and it gets some different perks here and there, but that one's for a lot of the fan base. That's as much Destiny as any of the story stuff.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, no, I've been really, really enjoying that. I also started playing a game that's been sitting in my library for a long time now.
Hang on, JT. Before
yes.
you move on from Destiny, I wanted to ask because you said
slow your roll.
Yeah, just relax.
I'll
All right,
try.
okay. We're in no rush here. You said that you've been kind of playing through the story mainly. I was interested to know, like, because I've been playing quite a bit of Star Wars: The Old Republic, which you talked about a couple of episodes ago, and I've been playing through that single player, and the kind of like the experience scale now in that game is pretty much balanced so that you can just play the single player, what's basically single player story content, and you never have to go outside of that to any kind of grindy elements. Like you're never under leveled for a zone and you have to go and do extra stuff. You can just play through it as if it's a storyline. And I was just wondering about that with Destiny. Like, do you have to do other stuff? Do you like finish one of the stories and then you've kind of got to get to like, I know there's like an item level thing in Destiny. Do you have to get to like an item level to start the next one, or is it like a seamless path through all those things?
I found it pretty seamless. Now, just to back up a bit as well, prior to the campaign, I've actually been playing way more other content before I even touched the campaign. And then I realized, I think I just read somewhere that you go to the hangar in the tower, which is an area in the game, and you get the old campaigns as quests from like a vendor there. I think you could probably finish all the campaigns, not including the two last ones, Forsaken and Shadowkeep, but you could probably do those in about a good half a day. Like, if you were to start at midday, you'd be finished by, within 10 to 11 hours. So they're not hugely long. But they are seamless with one another. There's no real requirements. However, once you finish them, you're probably going to be wanting to do, it gives you a bit of a taste for a lot of the other content there, but you still don't need to partake in a lot of the PvP things and the end level things like raids and strikes. I'm still yet to do a raid because there's no matchmaking. That's like the larger one. Like, think strikes, Timmy, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, are like 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
Raids are 6.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't done a raid yet.
Yeah, I actually, you know what? I haven't either. I'm really keen because there's a bit more of a problem-solving element to a lot of that gameplay, but it's just something I haven't got around to.
Yeah.
I just was going to add, in talking to Paul's question specifically about whether it's seamless and don't have to do any grindy stuff, but it might be a little bit different for me because obviously where JT started, they've done the level starts at like level 70, I think it was, and everybody kind of starts there, whereas I was at that level at the end of doing all of what JT's doing now, waiting for Shadowkeep to drop.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, there were definite points through the main campaigns for like Forsaken, probably not the DLC that JT's doing, but for Forsaken definitely, and the Red War as well. There were bits where it was like you could see the level sitting there, and it would say all party members need to have this much light or energy.
Right. Okay.
The thing is, though, because I feel like Destiny's world design and like the planet design and stuff is so nicely done that like you always feel like you're in those places already, and it feels seamless, like running past a big guy and be like, oh, he's high level, I'll just kill him on my way, and you'll get a good gear drop. Or you're on your way and a public event happens, so you start doing it. I never felt like I had to stop and go and grind, but I could see stuff that I wasn't able to do yet. There'd always be like other quests, like maybe side quests, or maybe sometimes it'll give you all three of the next story points you need to do. And they'll be differently leveled, so you do the ones you can do, obviously. I never felt like I was stopping and going, ugh, all right, I have to just go and grind for ages so that I can do this. So it's like a yes and a no to your question, Paul.
Yeah, I get what you
that,
mean.
in that it wasn't always just like once I finished that story bit, I could instantly go into the next story bit, but it was never like, all right, it wants me to go and grind and just slave away for hours.
Yeah,
And
yeah, right. So
like,
it's
like I
not
think,
like it feels like you hit a wall and you're going back and just redoing old content to get to new
Yeah.
stuff.
absolutely, because after you've done that story thing, you can always just go and like go back to the tower, like trade in the resources you found, or um have items like unlocked by the cryptographer and stuff like that. And you're getting new gear, which is essentially what levels you up in Destiny. So it never felt like a chore. And I think we mentioned this last time we spoke about it, that Destiny has one of the most pleasant grinds. Like if you do want to grind, it's just fun. The gameplay is good. There's so many different ways to do it. And like you can pick the ones that you like best and focus on those. Or there's all the different planets you can go to where they have different kind of stuff. So yeah. But yeah, JT, I think I'm really glad that you're enjoying this again, like I mentioned, and I'm very keen to see how long it takes for you to spend a little bit of money.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy with how that went, and yes, I'm sure it won't be too long before I do spend a little bit of money on it, but it depends. Yeah, I'm just going to see how much I can get out of the free to play, and like you said to me once, you don't really get a whiff of the feeling of free to play. It just feels like you're playing another game.
Well, yeah, like I that's probably not a bad way of doing it, right? Getting as much as you can out of it, and then you'll know for sure if you want to spend the money. But be interesting to see if you like burn yourself out on it and then don't need to spend the money. How do they keep you interested? This is
A
a nice
little,
case study.
yeah, yes, could write a paper or two on it.
Mm.
Apart from that, though, I have been getting into an older game called Spec Ops: The Line. That is a game from 2012, but it's one that a lot of people have talked about over the years as being one of the better sort of modern combat, modern warfare storylines in a game. And I've been enjoying it. It's not bad. It's aged. It hasn't aged that well, to be honest. It looks like a game that's almost a decade old. Kind of plays like one. The storyline is engaging. I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking, like some people have actually mentioned that as being a descriptor for how good the game is. But that might just be because I'm playing it so much later. But I do like that. I think, Paul, you mentioned that you might have it in your library as well, or you might be planning on getting it.
Yeah, I think I've had it. It's one of the two. It's either been on my wish list or in my library for years.
Yeah.
And I'd heard that's the same thing. I'd heard like when this game came out and it just looked like another generic military shooter. And then it came out and everyone was like, holy shit, this game has an incredible story. And that's kind of why I've always kept it in the back of my mind as like something I should get to.
Well, this ended up following like that quintessential cult classic trajectory, right? Like everyone kind of looked like overlooked it, like Paul was saying, because it seemed just like another shooter. And a lot of the initial reviews that came out, because the first day reviews often, depending on the length of the game, they might have only played 2/3. But then it's kind of people realized that it really had something to say, and it was kind of twisting the genre on its head, and it's become like a cult classic, fan favorite.
It's pretty coherent. I think that's probably the part that most people say or give it praise for without really saying that that's what it is. But in a time, back almost a decade ago when the entire market was saturated with Call of Duty and Modern Warfare games, it had just that little bit of coherency and slight difference on how you play the game. It's not an FPS, it's like an over-the-shoulder third-person game.
Well, JT,
And
just correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to jump in there while you're talking about what it's been lauded for and why it stands out. I haven't played it at all. I've read some articles about it. I've watched some, reflections on it. And my impression was that the reason it came out is because you're right, it was in the middle of Battlefield was at its height, and there was a Call of Duty every 6 months dropping and stuff like that. But this game was the first one that really was kind of not at all glorifying warfare, and it was tackling PTSD, and because of that, it had like a unreliable narrator, and it kind of made the player question the things it was doing. Like by the end of the game,
That's
am
also what I
I?
heard about it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it was in the middle of like a bunch of really like by the numbers black and white war story games, and this was something that was complicating that. Again, I
it
haven't played it either.
yeah, no, it does have those elements in there. And I think back in the day, those are probably what would have drawn people to it. I mean, for me, the thing that I like is the coherency in the story, the the grey areas, and I guess the moral implications of the game in the since it came out has been done way better in a lot of other games. So I think maybe I've been spoilt by just time and maybe some of those games borrowed from that. I don't know, but playing it now, I don't particularly find the story that overwhelming in terms of the downfalls and effects of warfare. Um,
Yeah, I wonder
though
whether it resonated more. Did you say it came out in 2002?
2012, I
2012.
think
Okay.
that's when the copyright at the start is. So I'm assuming it is. It's actually, and just quickly, I didn't know this. It's actually a reboot to a series. It's actually the 10th entry in the Spec Ops series, but it's a reboot. There's a bunch of old tactical Spec Ops games that came out uh, at the start of the millennium,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they're not really like this at all. This is much more narrative in structure, where they were more like Tom Clancy Rainbow Six games. When you pick your loadout and it's all very technical.
So given kind of what Paul and I have been saying and the impressions you've relayed to us so far, I'm curious to know how far through the game you are at the moment, JT.
There are 15 chapters, and I'm on the 12th one now. And
Okay.
each chapter probably goes for about 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay. It's not a really long game, which I kind of like. For this kind of game that's basically, it's very linear, and there's no real, you don't really make any choices. It's got the illusion of choice. That's a big part of the game, but
Mhm.
you don't really make any choices that are impacting what happens one way or another. I'm yet to see the conclusion and what happens following some of the bigger decisions that have been made throughout the storyline. So I'll, maybe next episode I'll get back and sort of just say this is what ultimately happened. I'm enjoying it. I think I paid $3 for it, and I can say that I've definitely got my money's worth. So
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. Well,
that's what I've been playing.
Hearing that it's like that short, what you're describing, makes me way more likely to check this out. Like obviously for $3, it's probably always worth it. But I'm not a shooter person.
Yes.
But I'd heard stuff about this game that I think would appeal to me. It being that short it's kind of like that. Yeah, it's even more like, all right, I can do that. Even if, like you say, even if it kind of it's lost a bit of its effect over the years and stuff like that. Yeah, that's really appealing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think for a short game, it's great. I will say very quickly, though, that the gunplay becomes very, very repetitious to the point where I'm sort of just running through some areas because I don't want to sit there fighting wave after wave of enemy. And that seems to be one of the formulas in the game. But it's worth it given the fact that the storyline is quite good. So, yeah, there you have it.
I
Right.
like your invented word just then, repetitious.
Repetitious?
It-
Repetitive.
yeah,
That's
repetitive.
the one I was looking for.
Nah,
It's,
nah,
it's, it's,
nah,
if,
nah. Double down. Repetitious is great.
it's,
Make it
if
a thing.
something is repeatedly delicious, it's repetitious. Repeatedly delicious. Eating a punnet of strawberries is repetitious.
Well, look, I'm sounding like a broken record, but when you finish that one, you got to let us know what you think because I'm really curious. Like, just given what I've heard about it and kind of what I'm hearing from you, there's a little bit of a disconnect, and
Mm.
I'm wondering if there's more to it that you're going to discover, or whether, like you're saying, perhaps because it was, it is, closing in on a decade old now, that the stuff that it was praised for has really been built upon since, so it doesn't seem so groundbreaking anymore.
I think that's the major part of it, to be
Yeah.
honest. And I think I can just feel that playing it because while you play it, like, this is great. And you put yourselves in the shoes of a 2012 person playing it, you probably would be blown away. But I've since been spoiled, like I said. So, but I'm yet to reach the climax, and I guess that will, really drive home whether it's a great game or just a good one for, in today's gaming economy.
Fair enough. Well, look, I've been playing a whole bunch of Pokemon, um, and I don't want to say too much because we're thinking about maybe dedicating an episode just to Pokemon Sword and Shield,
Yeah.
because both Paul and I have been playing it, and I this game has like got its hooks in me so much that the whole time I've been playing it, I've been jotting down notes for this podcast, and I never do that. I kind of, the half hour before the episode, I'll write down a couple of things, but this is like I keep doing things and going, I got to remember that, or I love that, or this is the fourth time I've noticed that. I've got to talk about it, and so much of it like is spoiler territory, kind of getting into the end game stuff. So I don't want to just chat about it briefly in an episode like this, but I really hope we do that because I will just say, as a teaser for that, I think this is far and away the best Pokemon game ever. Like I'm floored by it.
That's a big call.
Yeah, and I mean, like we've spoken about other Pokemon games a fair bit on this podcast, and in particular, the last one, well, the last one that wasn't like a reskin of another, Sun and Moon. This one addressed all of my issues with that. It has all of the bits from other games that I liked most, and it seems to have very few of the ones that I didn't like. And it takes things that I did like as game mechanics that didn't really have an explanation in world and gives them very natural reasons for existing. That seems like no brainers. There's so much in this that I'm like, that makes so much sense that like I'm amazed it wasn't the way it's always been, kind of thing.
Do you have an example of that that's not like a story spoiler?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, they don't have any kind of EXP share or explanation for that. If you have your Pokemon in your party, they all get experience from a
Yeah.
battle.
Yep.
Like, so that's an example of like, the little like in-world kind of explanation thing in that there just isn't one. You've got them all on you, so they're all present at a battle, so they all get a little bit of experience. Or rather, you could say they gain experience because you have more experience as a trainer and someone who battles Pokemon, I don't have my notes on me, but I have a lot more of them written down. Trust me, there's so much stuff like this in the game.
Well, going off what you said before, I would say I'm probably halfway through. I think I've got four, like halfway-ish. I've got 4 badges, and I assume there's 8 as normal.
Yep.
And then a bit of story after that. But yeah, I'm about 4 badges in terms of gyms, and I can definitely see myself saying it's the best Pokemon game there is, but I wouldn't say that I think all of it's good. I just think maybe there are elements of the Pokemon game design which this game doesn't do away with, which I find really frustrating, and I wish they would just change. I feel like this game is almost like they didn't take the full step forward putting it on the Switch. They went like half the way. Like I still think the wild area is probably the most innovative and interesting thing that they've ever done in a Pokemon game, and I think it's amazing. But then there's kind of like little gates they put on that, like um your badges limit the level of the Pokemon you can catch, and I don't remember that was the way it worked. I thought previously what it was that the number of badges you had made Pokemon above a certain level less likely to obey you, so you could get a higher level Pokemon if you managed to somehow, which was kind of impossible in the other games, and they just might sometimes ignore you in battle. But this one it blocks the Pokemon you can get in terms of level based on which gym badge you have. And so I have run up against this a couple of times that I get my gym badges, then I go out into the wild zone, and they have these like extra powerful Pokemon just wandering around there, and you can run into them and start an encounter with them, but you can't catch them because your gym badges limit what you can catch. And there's no point really standing there and having all your Pokemon die fighting them. It might be worth it if you could catch a powerful Pokemon, but because they tell you can't do that, I kind of feel like the wild zone has so much potential, and then they do this thing like that where it's like, oh, there's like wild Pokemon that are higher level and it's just in the wild and you can do something with it. But then because of these other mechanics, there's no reason to ever stop and do anything with a Pokemon like that. You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason to fight it. There's no reason to stop because you're not allowed to catch it because the game just blocks you from doing it. And it just makes me feel like, well, why is it there? Why bother to even show you that?
The one reason straight away is because you get absolutely bulk experience from taking something down that big. And I know, Pokemon games are pretty good at being designed so that you don't need to spend too much time grinding. But there were a few times in this where I was just like, I need to be high leveled for this next challenge. I've obviously got here too quick, and doing stuff like that did help. Also, I'm going to research that for you because I had a feeling that did exist.
Okay.
In previous games. It's just that because there was nowhere like the wild area where you were likely to run into such high level Pokemon, you never really ran up against it.
Right. But that's I don't know. It's almost my issue though. It's like if that was there in the past, it was kind of fine because they never presented you with the option. But it's like now it's there and they just stop you from doing it, and it's a bit frustrating. Like I found a cool Pokemon the other day that was level 36, and my thing lets me catch Pokemon up to level 35, and the Pokemon that I had were level 33, and I'm not grinding at all. Like they've got to that just through me like zooming through the story, and it just feels like it's such an arbitrary thing that this Pokemon that I can comfortably, using 2 or 3 of mine, get down in health and catch, because like I don't have the badge. It's just like, yeah, you can't catch it.
Yeah, I mean, I do get that completely. Like, I think I told you about my first encounter in the wild area before I realized it was a badge thing. I got an Onyx that was so high leveled right down to nothing.
Yep.
And then
I had the same thing happen.
Yeah, it's just like it tells you you can't break the Pokemon's concentration to throw a ball or something, which it does. It's not a very good explanation. I will agree with you on that flaw, but at the same time, those really high leveled Pokemon aren't the only ones in there in the wild area. There's so much to catch, so many different types, so many that are within your level thing. It's only those big ones you see walking around that normally are the really high leveled ones. So I still, while I agree that the explanation for not being able to catch them is frustrating, I don't agree with you that it renders the wild area like moot.
Well, to be fair, I didn't say that. Like I love the wild area. I think the wild area is amazing. Like I said just before, I think it's the most innovative thing they've done. Like I love the changing weather. I love going into the wild area and seeing like, oh, it's snowing here. I wonder what new Pokemon are here that weren't there yesterday. The specific thing that annoys me is those large Pokemon being there easily accessible at any point in your game, but there being game mechanics which block you off from interacting with them in an interesting way.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair enough. Look, I will say that I'll agree with you there, but at the same time, this game more than any other Pokemon game has got me actually taking the time to fill my Pokedex. And now that I've finished it, the wild area, having all of those Pokemon there, I'm not really feeling hard done by going back and getting them and stuff now. So could it be done better while you're progressing? Probably, but I'm not really too fussed at this point. Just because the rest of the game has got me so engaged that I struggle to begrudge it that minor quibble.
Yeah,
But
I'm like I find myself sort of between story bits. I just drift back to the wild area. It's like I'll
yeah,
do like I'm trying to actually like I did this with Sun and Moon. I think we talked about it on a previous episode. I kind of identified my like burnout with Pokemon because I have sort of a completionist problem with Pokemon games where I try and do everything. And I've realized at some point in Sun and Moon that there's so much in Pokemon games I really dislike because like it's so much of it is just like made for kids, like literally made for kids, and it's not interesting stuff. Like all the dialogue everywhere in Pokemon worlds is just like pointless, and it's like moral lessons for 5-year-olds. And I just realized like I need to skip all the stuff I don't like and just do the things that I do enjoy. And so I've approached this the same way. Like I don't bother like exploring towns. I just do the things that are interesting in them rather than like walking into every house and things like that.
hmm
And so I kind of like I'll mainline it to a gym. I'll dodge the trainers on the way. I won't stop and catch Pokemon or anything like that. Then beat the gym, and then rather than go back and kind of grind my way through those, if I want to just play around, I just go to the wild area, and it's so much more interesting than like the linear routes that you would do in previous ones, where it would be, oh, I need to maybe level up a bit, or maybe you just want to level up a Pokemon so they evolve. Rather than like I'll go and run through this cave over and over again, it's like I'll just go and have a look around the wild area. Like I'll see what new Pokemon are there right now. Maybe I'll catch some, maybe I'll just kill some. Like it's such an
see,
interesting thing.
see, I don't necessarily agree with you because I spent like a lot of, I would say, the first half of my playthrough of like the main story, I really kind of avoided the wild area. Like I didn't really care for it that much. I just wanted to keep doing the story and discovering new areas.
Hmm.
Like I would go in there when I was like, oh, I want that kind of Pokemon. I remember seeing it there, or oh, I need to get a Firestone, and I've heard there's one in here. And I've since come around, and I really enjoy it for all the reasons you've said. But I think the way they changed the random encounters has made
It's
me
it's so
enjoy
much
doing
better, isn't it?
just what you were talking about, running through a cave, right? Because I
Yeah.
can see the ones I want, and if I'm in an area and I know there's meant to be one here because my Pokedex shows me, and I can see rustling there, I might still run into that one. So I'm still going for the random ones sometimes. I'm taking more time running into the Pokemon I see because in the other ones, I would never fill my Pokedex because I get so sick of running into the same a Rattata 4 times in a row that I just throw on a repel and steer clear of the grass and get out of there.
Yeah,
This
I
time,
can.
because I can see there's other Pokemon that I haven't got, I'm happy spending time walking backwards and forwards on the same route.
Yeah, I can never ever use a Zubat in any Pokemon game ever because like every cave in every game has just made me develop this hatred of Zubats. It's like anytime there's a cave segment in an old Pokemon game, it's just the worst. But now
Yeah,
it's like now I don't mind it at all. Now going into a cave is exactly like you say. It's like all right, if I see something new, I'll stop and try and catch it or at least add it to my Pokedex. And if I don't, I'll just run past them. And yeah, it makes that process so much more enjoyable.
absolutely. Look, I got so much I could say about this. Like even just talking about the random encounters thing, I have so much to say. So I'm gonna leave it there because I do really want to have a much more in depth discussion about it. So um, I'm gonna hope that we can get that episode off the ground and come back to it um, if we don't get the chance to do that one. But look, you've been playing some card games, and you kind of teased me and JT offline by saying there was one in particular with a very interesting draw mechanic. And so I'm keen to hear what you've been playing uh, in the non-video games portion of Disc and Dice.
Yeah, so along with my Warhammer gaming that I did, I guess over the kind of um, the Christmas New Year period, because there's so much sort of like getting together with family and friends, you know, including visiting you in Melbourne, Timmy. The kind of like real quick play card games came out a whole bunch over that period, and specifically Organ Attack, which we've talked about at length on this pod, so I'm not going to I'm not going to go there again. But also another game called Ramen Fury that we played with you, Timmy, which I guess I would very simply explain as basically sushi go with ramen. So you're basically making ramen, and the person with like the highest points wins based on how you put them together. And it's got some nice little mechanics about what you're allowed to put in your bowl, and you have to have like one of a certain number of things. It's kind of cool. But
Yeah, like I guess the have we spoken about Sushi Go before?
probably not on this
Probably not.
podcast.
Well, the big difference between Sushi Go and Ramen Fury, Sushi Go, you're like passing a deck around, like you pass your hand to the right, and everyone kind of takes things. In this one, you've got kind of like communal ingredients, and everybody can kind of see what you're working on and can kind of mess with your hand. In Sushi Go, you can mess with people by being like, I'm going to make sure I don't pass this card along so they can't get what they want. But in Ramen Fury, I can put chili in your bowl to make it too spicy and ruin it. So all of a sudden you lose points, you know, and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. But the thing I wanted to mention about these two is that they both had really interesting things regarding drawing cards, and it just got me thinking because like we play a lot of card games, whether it's like this kind of stuff or Magic and things like that, and often drawing cards is just drawing cards. You know, like
Start of your turn, draw one card. Yeah, it's
right,
part of the course. Yeah.
right, and I feel like 95% of games they just if they've got a card drawing mechanic, they just use that one. You know, however many cards you're supposed to have, you draw that many at the start. There you go, you're done. And yeah, these two had something interesting. So Organ Attack has a card which is like the poison card, and if you draw it at any point into your hand, you have to reveal it, and you instantly lose one of your organs. So it's quite a setback to draw this. And the rest of Organ Attack is very, very liberal with redrawing cards. So you redraw your cards every single time you get rid of anything. You draw back up to 5. Like not just on your turn. You do it if you use something on another person's turn. You draw up straight away. And there are lots of special cards that let you like discard your whole hand or get everyone to discard their hand. And so it kind of like it really encourages you to burn through your hand very quickly. But it's got this extra element where there is a card in the deck that will really mess you up if you draw it. And I had a situation where I lost a game because I was specifically trying to burn through my hand to get cards that were better. And I drew the poison card and it killed my last organ. And I just thought that was like a really nice counterbalance between like those two mechanics to have redrawing be something which is very common, but there's a little bit of a risk reward to that in Organ Attack. But Ramen Fury really had the one which I thought was most interesting. So the way drawing cards works in Ramen Fury is you have a standard discard pile which is face down, so you can't see what you're drawing. And then next to it, you have 4 cards which sit face up on the table. And when you draw your card on your turn, you can choose to take one from the pile or take one from one of the 4 face up cards. And I thought this was really interesting because it turns drawing a card into a decision. It's no longer just I need to draw, I draw. It's do I take the gamble knowing I could get anything, so it could be amazing or crap, and draw from the discard pile, or do I play it safe, take one of the 4, but I know that I'm limited to just these 4 cards. And I really liked that the way it made that a strategic decision.
Yeah, you can also play your turn so that you can draw a couple of cards in a turn, and this allows you to like with that mechanic, you draw one of the visible ones, even if like, you know, I don't really want that, but at least I know what I'm getting, because then whatever that top card is going to fill the spot, and so you get to see what
Uh-huh.
it is before taking it. Then you could take the next top one off if that one came out and wasn't what you wanted either. You know, interesting how like as you learn more about how the game works, you can like be clever about where you're drawing from, even if it's not something you really want here. You're like, I'm gonna get to see more. You know.
Yeah, and there are those special cards that if you draw one into there's a name for the 4 cards that sit face up. I can't remember what it is in the game,
It's
but
like the pantry or something.
that's right, the pantry. It's like if you restock the pantry and there are certain kinds of cards. There are certain kinds of cards that if you draw them into the pantry, you get to keep them straight away. You don't have
Yeah.
to put them down. So there's like a whole bunch of things that tie into it. It's really cool.
It is really cool, and it's thematically really strong, that game.
Yeah.
Lots of fun.
I'm just trying to visualize how that works, just mechanically, outside of what you just said. So,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
so you've got the four face-up cards, and then obviously the what you would call like a traditional draw pile,
Deck.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just a traditional deck. Are those both like, so do you restock the pantry from the same deck? Are they
Yes.
different types of, okay, so they
So
can
if
be,
you take one of the face-up visible cards, you immediately replace it from the top on the deck.
okay then,
So you're
right.
just choosing between knowing what you're getting and taking
Yes.
chances.
So you can have, you could realistically draw in the pantry, have, 4 amazing cards, or just, it's still just the luck of the draw. It's not like it's
Yep.
got its own separate thing where, they're more mundane or whatever.
No,
Yeah,
no.
and yeah, it's all coming from the same spot, and like Paul mentioned, like in Organ Attack, there are some cards that are used straight away. So if you draw that, you get to play it straight away and then replace it. Then
Does that mean that, I mean, with your experience with the game, do people tend to go for the pantry more because, one, it's obviously the safer bet, but two, the second a good card comes into play, someone's just going to snap it up, right?
without getting too much into the mechanics of the game, it really depends what you need. I would say it's a pretty even split what people go for, because you have bowls in front of you, and you were trying to make and eat 3 bowls of ramen, and each bowl you can put different ingredients in it, but you need to put one kind of flavor in it. So you're either going to put like a beef stock in, or a chicken stock, or make it a vegetable broth. And if you do a vegetable one, you only score points if you have vegetables in there. Like any meat that you put in there, you don't score the points from. And
Right.
and sometimes you can get like a tofu counts as a meat and a vegetable, right? So if somebody is working on a vegetable ramen, then they're going to need to get veggies. So if there's none in the pantry, they're going to be taking their chances.
Right. Like
So
another example is there's chilies is one of the cards, and if you have a chili in your bowl, it adds takes away from your score. But there's a special card you can get which turns your ramen bowl into like a chili bowl, and then any chilies you get add to your score. So it kind of, you have some people who, or most people, I guess, are trying to avoid the chilies all the time. But then if you get that card, then all of a sudden, like, you're hunting for the thing that no one else wants. So you can have cards that, like, you can have a card that people really don't want to draw because it's actually a negative, and then but that's also a card that other people are specifically hunting for. It's like Timmy said, it's kind of like really like tightly designed, that game.
Right. Or you can preemptively get that card and then just take your chances getting the special
Right,
card, right?
that's also true.
For-
Yeah.
for an example, Paul was doing quite well straight off the bat in that game, and so we all started hitting him with chili. And he realized there was a mechanic that you can do kind of twice per game, which allows you to take something out of your bowl and put it into another bowl. And he realized that everyone was avoiding the chili, so no one was going to be going for the chili flavor. So he used that ability to move all of his chili into one bowl, and then as soon as that chili flavor came up, he took that so he could score his bowl, and he turned us trying to screw him up into a massive amount of points.
Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
very much like Sushi Go, but with the sounds like a couple other extra little layers of
The way it's
strategy
most
in there.
Yeah, the way it's most like Sushi Go is the scoring. Like certain, like in Sushi Go, how it's like some of them are
Kind of
just like
matching
you
stuff
have
up.
this many sushi rolls, and so you get this many points. But then other ones are like, if you have two of this card, you get 3 points. But if you have three of it, you get 8 points.
Yeah.
It's similar kind of scoring mechanics.
Yeah, but the thing that kind of uh, got me interested in bringing this up was these drawing mechanics, and I wanted to ask you guys whether you could think of any other examples, because the more I thought about it, the more I thought exactly what you said, Timmy, that so many games it's just like start of your turn, draw one, that kind of thing, that it's very rare for games to do anything creative with it. So yeah, I don't know if you can think of anything.
So one that jumped to mind was Keyforge, and it's funny. What you're talking about, people don't put much thought into the drawing thing. We were really impressed with the way Keyforge puts its draw card step as the last part of a turn, which means you don't draw at the start of your turn. So if someone on their turn does something that affects your hand, you go into your next turn with less cards and there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas, in Magic and other similar competitive card games, you always start with the draw. It also meant that you got your whole opponent's turn to kind of be planning your next turn, as opposed to in Magic, at least, you're not often sitting there going like, man, I really hope I get a land next, or man, I really hope I get like a powerful creature because I've got all this land out, and you're kind of waiting. Whereas in this, you're spending the whole time planning because you've got your hand right there. You know what you're going into the next turn with, and that we really liked that. We commented on how much that changes the game and it being very impressive. But now that we're talking about these other actually quite interesting draw mechanics, it's kind of like that's the simplest change, and
It changes a lot
it's
though.
like it does, but it feels like the bare minimum draw change in a game like that, and then it still changes so much. So it makes you wonder why people aren't doing more with drawing rules.
Yeah, I love that Keyforge thing, because I think it works well with Keyforge not having like a what's the word I'm looking for? Not having like a resource that you spend, like land in Magic. So like, if you just have one hand of all the same house in Keyforge, you can just play them all, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that. And the draw mechanic means that you can do that with this, like, safe in the knowledge that at the end of your turn you get to restock your hand. You don't have to worry about like, oh, I'm burning my whole hand here and then I've got nothing for a while. You know that it's kind of you're instantly restocked again, and it's kind of like it meshes well with that rule.
Yeah, I think it like we were saying, it seems like not that substantial a change, but then it really kind of changes the makeup of that game and what a turn is.
Were there any others that
I
you guys could think of? Like, the only other things I kind of thought of were like real simple stuff, like how Coup has like the ambassador card that lets you swap cards, and it
Mhm.
kind of has a bit of, it's not really an interesting draw card thing, but it just has that thing where rather than say you put your cards down and draw two, you get to draw four, but you keep two of the four. So you get like a pool to choose from each time you do that, which I think it makes what seems like quite a mundane ability. It's just change your cards, and we always joke that no one ever does it in Coup, but it actually makes it quite powerful because you get double the cards and you pick the best ones.
Yeah. The only other ones I kind of think of, this isn't really a draw rule, it's just an interesting way to use cards, is in Dead of Winter, how you have the Crossroads deck. So at the
Hmm.
start of every turn, the person sitting next to you draws a card, and if you fulfill the necessary trigger for that card, an event happens. But it could be literally anything in the game, and you don't know what it's going to be. And a lot of the time, those cards don't even get pulled, which adds to the replayability. So it's not so much an interesting draw rule, but it is an interesting way to use a deck. And the other one is in Ticket to Ride. I don't know if I played this with you guys, but essentially in Ticket to Ride, you're making train routes across Europe, or actually across America in the base game. Um, and you start with two cards drawn from the uh, deck of routes, and the longer it is, the more points you get for achieving it. And the reason it's interesting is that you can choose to draw those cards on your turn basically whenever you want. But if you don't finish your route by the time the game ends, you lose the points on that card. So it's kind of like your choice whether you draw or not. And so you can kind of go, I'm doing quite well here. I don't want to leave it too close to the end of the game to draw another route. Should I do it now? But you could get like a really long one, and then you're in trouble because now you've got a massive route you need to finish, as well as the two you're already working on.
I remember I remember that now. I think I've played Ticket to Ride a couple of times just with you, and
Yeah.
it's been quite a few years. But now now you're saying I remember that kind of like it's like a risky choice you can make to do that or not.
You could get like a bunch of short routes, and then you might cumulatively have more points, and you might go, man, but they're all small. I don't know what other people get, and then you pull a monster, and all of a sudden you've got to complete this, and it's late in the game. So again, not so much about the draw rule itself, but using a deck in a different way to influence the way you play the game.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess not too many others we could think of. I guess I'll be kind of on the lookout for it now.
Yeah.
Now that these games have alerted me to it. And if anyone's listening and they can think of games that do have interesting and unique draw mechanics, let us know. Get in touch, discanddice@gmail.com. And we're actually going to take a quick break now, and then we will come back with a question from someone who did just that and got in touch with us. So we'll be back in a minute with some more games.
Games.
Welcome back to Disc and Dice. Now, as we mentioned before that break, we have some listener mail here that we're going to jump right into for the last part of the pod. And we've got an email from now regular correspondent Flynn, who gets in touch and says, "Hey pod racers, thank you for your advice on finding a game to play with my wife, as well as your recommendations on buying a Switch. I appreciate your suggestion to kill two birds with one stone and find a Switch game that we can play together." He says that we've since bought a Switch and had fun with Mario Kart and played Overcooked and Mario Party with friends, although he's trying to find another game specifically to play with his wife because he says, "I destroy her on Mario Kart and Overcooked is just too much like actual life to play with a spouse." But Flynn does send a question here. He says that he tends to gravitate towards big open world games like Witcher 3, Subnautica, and Mafia 3. He says, "Although I absolutely loved Witcher and Subnautica, I find that lately I tend to tire of this kind of game before I can finish them. For me, The Last of Us was a great balance between having a linear story but still giving some freedom and flexibility around how to complete each stage. So, are there any games that you've enjoyed that are good for about 30 hours or so? Cheers, Flynn."
This question really interested me because it might be being a little bit nitpicky, but the example game that he chose there, The Last of Us, I think that very specifically doesn't have multiple ways to do a lot of things in that game.
Yeah, I'd
Like,
probably agree.
obviously, like, you kind of, you can choose to be a little bit stealthier, or you can go, I'm going to throw a grenade rather than, pick people off or whatever it might be. But generally, you're very funneled towards a certain spot or entrance or building or room, and you have to get to a very specific part at the other end of that, and it's going to trigger a story bit that's a quick time event or whatever it might be. And while I do love that game and I think it's a great world and it's very fleshed out, and I didn't necessarily feel like I was being forced to do anything that I would have done differently, just saying that's an example of being open enough and a few different ways to do things, I don't think is necessarily actually descriptive of that game. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I probably agree. Yeah, I think that like there's a big difference between Last of Us and those kind of open world games.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess the thing I thought reading this was that, like, he says, "Are there any good games that we've enjoyed for around 30 hours?" I feel like it's an awkward amount of time for a game because I find that if it's something you can play for 30 hours, it's the kind of thing you can play for 100, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
it's like it's Witcher or Skyrim or something like that. It's the kind of thing that you can just absolutely get lost in and play double that. I
But
find that
perhaps,
if it's something shorter, it's much shorter. Like it's less
Mhm.
than 20 hours.
but perhaps it's not really about the runtime because I kind of feel for him here.
Hmm.
Um, Witcher is the exception for me in terms of big open world games that I just did absolutely every damn thing that I could and finished every mission, you know? I generally don't do that. In Fallout games, in Skyrim games, I would always get overwhelmed, I think, by just the breadth of opportunity in that game.
Hmm.
Um, I think Witcher, the reason which is the exception is that it passed out its elements very nicely at a nice rhythm in terms of, doing alchemy and using oils and consulting your bestiary and crafting and, all of that kind of stuff. Um, Upgrading like your freaking DNA with the mutagens and stuff. I think it walked you through that nicely over like the first, I don't know, 10 hours of the game. Um,
I just want to say, Tim, that I'm glad that you've managed to get in our customary praise for The Witcher 3 this episode.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll start getting checks from CD Projekt Red any minute now. But yeah, like for me, I never pay attention to the runtime of games. Like I didn't even thinking about this question. I've not looked up the timings of any games because I'm an awful judge of it, right? So
Hmm.
I wouldn't know where to start. But I feel like it's more to do with like being overwhelmed. There being too much, or at least they're feeling like there's too much. And everyone's got a different limit. Like I said, Witcher solved the problem for me, but Skyrim and stuff, I didn't do that much of, and I kind of bounced off it. I've spoken about Assassin's Creed Black Flag, loving the crap out of it, but they're just being so much, and you're not sure what's important and what's not. Um, so I bounced off of that as well. I would say, getting back to the actual question, if he loved The Last of Us, just grab the Nathan Drake collection,
Right.
and then the more recent two Uncharted games. All of them hold up. They're all great. It's Naughty Dog who did The Last of Us. It's a slightly lighter tone. It's a more Indiana Jones kind of story as opposed to this heart wrenching Last of Us story. But it's got a really nice element of exploration through still that kind of linear lens like Last of Us. I'd say the worlds in um, Last of Us, at least the latest ones, are a little bit bigger, a little bit broader. There's perhaps a little bit more option than in Last of Us.
Yeah, I
But
was
yeah,
I was thinking I this was one I thought as well. If you're looking for things like Last of Us, then those are the closest. And from what you were saying just then, specifically, I thought about the most recent one, which is called Lost Legacy. I think
mhm,
the kind of almost like half step Uncharted game.
yeah,
Um, that one has a little bit of that. It's not open world, but it has a little bit more openness in that one for you to kind
yeah.
of go around and solve puzzles and yeah.
It's like it's like you're not in the wild. You're in like a conservation park. Would be the comparison of open world to like open area. Like that's
Right.
how I would describe Lost Legacy.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'd really recommend those. So you can get the first three games together for the price of like one new game these days, even cheaper on sales. So can't recommend Uncharted enough. Um, yeah, you're right though, Paul. It is a little bit of a struggle, right? Because I go, what are kind of biggish games, but not too big? And you're trying to strike that balance, right?
I'd agree on the Uncharted series, as I think they hit that sweet spot in terms of time and still being able to do things like explore a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, Another one that I might add that's, I guess, similar in some ways, um, probably if it's on Switch, um, the Resident Evil HD remake
Oh yeah.
probably comes in about that. And really does justice to the the game that it's remaking, the first Resident Evil game.
Okay, cool.
And I think the second one as well is also on there, is also being remade.
And
Not sure if
you-
that's on Switch yet, but I would probably recommend that as well, because I watched that recently, someone doing that online, and that probably came in at about between 25 and 30 hours. Yeah, I'd probably recommend that if you're into horror games as well. And yeah, there's a good payoff with the storyline in Resident Evil if you're not familiar with it.
like if you're down with horror games and you want to be able to explore and kind of approach things in different ways, the most recent Resident Evil, I think it was 7. Was it 7?
The
Biohazard.
first person one, yeah.
Yeah, that one's actually quite good as well. But while we're talking games like Uncharted and Last of Us and stuff, Paul, you recently finished, and I'm playing at the moment, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
Yeah, I had that
and
on my list here as well.
Yeah, we remarked how similar that was to a Naughty Dog game in its feel.
And it's probably got a bit more openness than that.
Yeah.
You've got a bit of exploration there. I wouldn't say you get 30 hours out of it, but
No.
but
And you don't get that exploration in every level. It's very much like there are set pieces, and then you get the time to explore and stuff.
yeah, I think that's a good recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
I was yeah, like we're kind of saying, I kind of struggled a bit with this. Like, I'm trying to think of stuff that has a bit of openness to it, that sort of is along the lines of like Witcher and stuff like that, and Mafia, like you suggested, but isn't huge. And the one that I came up with, which I don't know how good it is as a recommendation now, because it's a 360 game and I don't think it's been remastered, is the first Batman Arkham Asylum game.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Because that's kind of like, it's pretty narrowly focused, but you can go back and do a lot of backtracking and collecting, and there's a bunch of little side stuff to do, and it's a great game. It's really good.
Yep.
But yeah, I feel like we're maybe just a little bit past going back to that one right now.
I even think Arkham City would be worth your time. But I'll be honest,
Yep.
I didn't play Origins, but I did download Arkham Knight because that's current gen, and I got that off the PSN store on a sale, and I think it's come up as like the member games and stuff as well. So you'll be able to get that one for not too much. And I actually really enjoyed Knight. People had real issues with the Batmobile, and perhaps it does force you to use it a bit more than you want to, but the mechanics of it itself are quite good. My issues with those games were always like, they kept trying to say like, now you've got all of Gotham, but they'd contrive a reason that there's no people in it. Like, it's been overrun by crooks and they've quarantined the city and there's no one in it anymore except for thugs, so you can just kill everyone. And it also would limit the city because you're in the quarantine zone. It's now Arkham City. It's not Gotham. The inmates have taken over. But that's kind of what Flynn's asking for, right? He kind of wants it limited to some extent. So I would say any of the 3 Arkham games by the original team, Arkham Origins, I can't speak for. And I was also just going to say the latest Tomb Raider franchise. It's kind of like the poor man's Uncharted, but it does do some things differently, and they are worth playing. I've enjoyed all 3 of those games.
The only other thing I thought about with this question was, because we're kind of struggling with it, I can kind of relate to this a bit in terms of burning out on really big games. This is something I tend to do. I kind of mentioned it a little bit with Pokemon when we were talking about it, Timmy, just before, that I kind of get a bit compulsive about completing things in games like that. Like, I have to do everything in every area, and I've kind of recently tried to be a bit more aware of it when I play games, to sort of identify when I'm doing something in a game that I don't actually like, that I'm just doing it because the game has given me like a meter to fill, or it's told me that I have 10 out of 50 of these things, and I'm just getting them because I want that to be 50 out of 50. And I feel like you can approach some of these games that Flynn's talking about, like Witcher, like if we're talking about stuff like Fallout and Skyrim, that if you sort of are aware of that, those can be 30-hour games if you just sort of identify what you enjoy in them and stick to that stuff. And I think it depends on the game. Like, I would say I had the most fun in the Assassin's Creed series, when I ignored the side stuff and I just went through the story. And on the other side, I would say I have the most fun in Bethesda games when I don't do the story, because I think their main stories are kind of crappy. But you could easily get 30 hours just screwing around in Fallout 4 and don't even worry about the main story if it doesn't interest you. If it does interest you, that gets you a good chunk as well. And I do feel like it sounds like kind of stating the obvious, saying like, don't do the things you don't like in games. But
sometimes you need to hear it.
Yeah, and games are like, like JT's joking about
Don't
like
owe anything to games.
no, but like JT's joking before about, like writing papers about something. I can't remember what it was, but there's no doubt that like the kind of reward loops and feedback loops that are built into games like this are like they're made to make you keep playing. It's triggering things in your brain that's making you think like, that's great, I got this next collectible, I got to get the next thing. And sometimes you need to sort of stop and look at it and be like, I'm not enjoying this, and it doesn't matter if I don't get it, so I'll just ignore this part of the game for the rest of the time.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Not that I wasn't paying attention to you, but while you were explaining that, I thought of another really good game though.
Yeah.
Marvel Spider-Man, this Spider-Man PS4 game. Like, that's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
That's got exploration if that's what you want, and then you can just do the storyline if that's what you want, and then if you want to unlock suits and stuff, you can do the extra stuff to do that. You're not obligated to do anything. It's limited to just New York, so it's a bit of a big open world, but it's not so big that you're having to fast travel to anywhere, swing from one side to the other. There you go.
One last game that I wanted to mention, and I'm just sort of mentioning at the end here because I know none of us have played it, but I have heard that The Outer Worlds, the recent Fallout style RPG, is even doing everything, it's about 20 to 25 hours, which
Really?
I really like the sound of that. So I know we don't see the Bethesda RPGs on Flynn's shortlist here, but I think this is probably similar-ish to those kind of things. So if that sounds appealing, maybe Outer Worlds is worth a look.
Yeah. Well, you've convinced me. But look, speaking of you having convinced me to play some stuff, should we have a chat about what we're looking to play before next episode?
I reckon we should. JT,
Yep.
what or how many hours of Destiny are you planning to play before our next episode?
It's funny because Timmy mentioned before he's worried that I might get burnt out. I'm worried that I might have started to do that now, but I'm still going to go and stick through for the last part of the campaign. I know that that's something you were interested in maybe joining me for, Paul, in the co-op.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from that, I actually might be getting back into DayZ Standalone, which is sort of a
that's
very
interesting.
Yeah, very divisive game because it's still sort of it's actually out of early access now, but it's still in development. I don't know how that works. I'm going to go back to it because they've brought in a lot of stuff that I felt was missing from the game when I last played it, which was a long time ago now.
I got to say, the probably 2 or 3 weeks I had playing DayZ every night, which was a few years ago now, were an experience that is completely unique in all the years I've been playing games. It was phenomenally good, but it was such a short period of like, this is mind blowing. Like, I've never played anything like this. I can't believe how fun this is. And then as soon as it started, like, because DayZ was kind of such a mess mechanically, it's like the whole thing just fell to shit, and the game was just full of hackers, and it wasn't fun. But it was this like small snapshot of time where it was like they had captured like the perfect zombie survival experience.
Yeah, I think Standalone, it's got a lot of merits from when I last played it. I really liked it, but there was a lot to be desired, but they've now brought in a lot of stuff that people have wanted, including myself, which is some more base building elements, things like that, so you can have a permanent sort of place to store things and whatnot. I'll be checking that out pretty soon, and I'm interested to see if it's a better experience to what I had prior to installing it again now. So interested to see. Yourself, Paul, what will you be getting up to?
Well, speaking of zombie games, just last night, you and I started playing Project Zomboid again, and we already got ourselves a nice big warehouse that we decided is perfect for us to fortify. So I'm hoping we can play, like we've said this a couple of times now, but I'm really hoping we can have a proper long game of Zomboid where we get to the point where the world starts to change, like the power goes off and we have to find fuel and generators. So I'm hoping we get to play a bit of that. I'll be trying to get through Pokemon. Like Timmy said, we are tentatively planning to do an expansion episode about that. So I'm going to try and get through that as quick as I can so that we can talk about that at length. And apart from that, I have recently bought the latest Football Manager game. I'm not sure how much conversation that'll get on the podcast here, but when I play that, it tends to consume every aspect of my life. So I may not play any of those other things in the next 2 weeks if I'm playing Football Manager.
Well, I am going to take your time being consumed with Football Manager and finally get around to playing Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, like I promised you I would do when we were going to do an episode about that. So you're off the hook if you don't end up getting around to Pokemon. We'll call it even. But I have been getting back into it already and really enjoying it. I don't look up, how long games go for and walkthroughs and stuff generally, so I have no idea how far through that game I am, whether I'm halfway or 2/3 through or near the end. I don't feel like I'm near the end. I feel like I might be around halfway, perhaps. Paul, you've played it. For your benefit, I am on Kashyyyk for like the second time, and I'm up in the canopy. I've just helped a big legendary bird dragon thing, and now I'm fighting one of the sisters, maybe the 9th one or something like that.
Right. I know exactly where you are.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. I'm really interested. I'm really interested to. Yeah, I know. I'm really interested to hear what you think of the story once you get through it all, because I talked about it on an episode a couple of episodes ago, and in hindsight now, after that episode, considering the quality of recent Star Wars media releases, Jedi Fallen Order is even further up my list now in terms of good stories, because we haven't had a great run for Star Wars.
Well, look, I'm really digging it at the moment, so I'll let you know. Like, I think it's the gameplay and the world and how it looks and feels that's most appealing to me. But I'll wait to pass judgment on the story till I'm done. And look, given how slowly I've been playing it, I'm pretty sure that'll take me through to next episode. But if by some miracle I finish it quickly and then have time for other things, that Dragon Ball Z game, Kakarot, came out of nowhere. Like, I heard about it at E3 and then knew it was coming like a year later. Now it's suddenly out. I love Dragon Ball Z, and they only ever make fighting games, and this is finally like a narrative and a bit of an RPG. So I'm heaps keen to get into it, even though it's a story I've watched and played 1,000 times. And then if not that, then Outer Worlds is right up there on the list as well.
Nice. Did you pick that up?
I haven't got it yet. No.
Okay.
I've literally picked it up in a store like a bunch of times. So close, because the packaging's really nice. It's like embossed and beveled and gold reflective in parts. It just looks real nice. But no, I haven't actually taken it home with me.
Well, that's our gaming for the next 2 weeks. As JT said at the start of the episode, it's been a slightly longer than expected break for us, but we are back to our usual schedule now. So we will see everyone in 2 weeks from now. Mm-hmm. And if you do want to get in touch, discanddice@gmail.com is our email address. If you've got a question for us, a suggestion for a discussion topic, anything like that, we'd love to hear from you. And we're on all the social medias, @discanddice on Twitter, facebook.com/discanddice. Find us on there, subscribe on your podcast app, review us, rate us, all that kind of stuff. We appreciate all of it. But that's it for this episode. So thanks, guys.
No worries. Always a pleasure.
Anytime.
And we'll be back in a fortnight for more games.
Games.
Games.